Hello, friends, and welcome to episode number 25 of Nostalgia Talk. Oh my God, we made it all the way to 25 episodes. Wow, that's
Is that
amazing.
weekly? 25 weeks or just 25 episodes?
Sometimes there's two per week, sometimes one a week, sometimes I'll just skip a week.
Uh-huh.
So it's pretty much kind of whatever happens kind of a thing.
Right.
Before I begin, as usual, I'd like to give a little shout out. Today, April 12th, is the birthday of one of the first guests who came on Nostalgia Talk back in October, puppeteer Kevin Carlson. Kevin is best remembered probably for his work for The Muppets. He was on the Sesame Street special Elmo Palooza. He was on The Thundermans for Nickelodeon. He played Warehouse Mouse on Imagination Movers. And, of course, was the title character and co-creator of The Adventures of Timmy the Tooth. So, Kevin, to you, it's a pretty amusing show.
Okay.
So, Kevin, to you, I say, happy birthday, Jiminy Biblets, as Timmy would often say.
Happy birthday, Kevin. That's great.
Joining me today for the 25th show is a Sesame Street legend. Yes, a legend. She has written for episodes, segments, songs, and books for about 45 years. Let's give a big welcome to Emily Perl Kingsley.
Hi. Well, I'm not happy about the lighting in here. This is.
This is.
Can you see me okay?
Yeah, I can see you good. This is an audio show, by the way.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess lighting doesn't really make that.
Doesn't matter a bit. I could be sitting in the dark. Okay.
Yeah. So in terms of episodes and segments for Sesame Street, Emily has written, for example, segments with Burton and Ernie. She wrote a lot of segments where the human characters are telling stories. She wrote some episodes featuring Maria and Luis's relationship and then the birth of Gabriella. She wrote episodes during Susan and Gordon's adoption of Miles, and she wrote one of my favorites from my childhood, Slimy becomes the first worm on the moon. And another recent one from a few years back was one where a dog named Brandeis became a service dog, and that was a pretty big one that you had written.
Yes, I was very happy with that.
Mm.
That was an exciting show.
Mm.
I
And
did a lot of very interesting preparation for that show because I wanted to make sure that I got all the details right. So I went out to New Jersey, Morristown, a town in New Jersey where the Guiding Eyes headquarters is. And I spent a whole day there just studying what they do with these dogs, how they train the dogs to be such fabulous service dogs. And I mean, there's so many things that you don't think about that these dogs have to be able to do. If you are sight impaired and you're following a dog, you have a dog on a harness, and let's say you have to go someplace where there's something hanging over and it's easy for the dog to get through, but the dog has to understand that you're bigger than the dog is and that you're going to crash into it if he has to accommodate for your height rather than his height. And so there's so many interesting things that they have to train these dogs to be able to do. So I followed them around for a whole day, and we went into a supermarket, we went into a bank, we went up an escalator. That was really interesting, to training the dog to be able to take the person on an escalator. At the end of the whole day of following them around and watching everything they were doing, the guide lady said to me, "Would you like to try it?" And I said,
whoa.
"Yeah." I said, "Really? Can I?" And so she gave me this dog whose name was Marino, and she put a blindfold on me and took me into this kind of residential neighborhood. It was sidewalks, but not nice sidewalks. It was like bumpy sidewalks. And she said, "When you're ready to go, you say to the dog, 'Go, Marino.'" So we're standing there, and I said, very tentatively, I said, "Go, Marino." Well, the dog takes off like, oh my
Whoa.
God. It was, and the dog is flying down. It wasn't really that fast. It just felt that fast to me. And the dog is going down the sidewalk. I can't see a thing. And I'm shouting, "Why so fast?" It,
Wow.
it was so amazing. All of a sudden, I said, I'm walking on grass. Why am I walking on grass? And she said to me, well, because there's some workmen who are working on the sidewalk and this dog doesn't want you to fall in the hole. So the dog's taking you up onto
Wow.
the lawn. And it was just incredible. I got so much respect and admiration for people who live their whole lives that way, who negotiate airports and all sorts of things. It was just a life-changing experience. Uh, Anyway, yes, I love
That
that show.
that's amazing. And in terms of songs, Emily has written, usually with other composers. I've got a list on my phone of a few of them.
Okay.
For songs, she wrote The Song of the Count, High, Middle, Low, Antarctica, Barn in the USA, A Cookie is a Sometimes Food, Counting is Wonderful, Counting Backwards in Spanish, Elmo's Rap Alphabet, It's a Circle, No Matter How You Count Them, and of course, Count Me In.
Mhm. Oh, yes, my favorite. Um,
Mm.
and another one that is a favorite of mine was one of the parodies that we did of Fiddler on the Roof, where I did tradition, I did addition. It was
Oh, yeah.
adding up how many fiddlers were actually up on the roof and
Mm.
counting them up, so it was addition rather than tradition.
Mm. There was
It's
one that you wrote that was about addition back in the early days that Jerry Nelson had sung. Adding is putting together.
yeah,
Adding.
yeah.
Yeah, not to be confused with that one. And for books, Emily has written the books What Do You Do? Farley Goes to the Doctor, Everyone Makes Mistakes, The Exciting Adventures of Super Grover, The Sesame Street Circus of Opposites, one of my favorites, Little Red Hen, Baby Sister for Harry, Big Bird Follows the Signs, and The Great Cookie Thief. So it's a pleasure to have someone with such an incredible career on the show today.
Well, I've had a wonderful time. It was a dream of a career. It was just 45 wonderful years.
Mm. So let's begin. So first question I have is, what did you aspire to want to become?
I mean, like in college and stuff like that?
Yeah,
Or
like what were your career goals? Like, was it always in writing?
no, it was never in writing. I had never written anything. Uh, I just wanted to get on the show. I would have done anything. Didn't matter. What happened was that I worked in television in a lot of different capacities. I worked on an exciting adventure show called East Side West Side, which is with George C. Scott, and I did script preparation, and I was like a PA on that show. I did a lot of research. I worked on the Dick Cavett show. I worked on a special with John Gielgud. I did a lot of production basically. Um, and when Sesame Street came on the air, my show that I was working on a game show and it had been canceled. So I was out
Ooh.
of work. And so I had the time to sit around and watch Sesame Street when it came on. It was a lot of promotion and publicity and when it first came on. So I watched it twice a day and I absolutely fell in love. And I said, that's where I need to be. And so I went and started, like hammering on the door and trying to get them to hire me. But it was the first season, and so they were fully staffed in everything. I tried to get a job in production. Well, they didn't need me. I tried to get research. They didn't need me. I tried editing. They didn't need me. I truly would have done anything just to get onto the show. And finally, after about 9 months of pestering them and making them crazy, they said, the only thing that we need is writers because that's so hard to do. We can't find anybody who can do this. It's writing curriculum, it's being educational, and being no more than 3 minutes long. The segments were very short, and being comprehensible by a 3-year-old and funny, So they had to put all those elements together, and they were having a lot of difficulty finding. Well, I had been watching the show twice a week for 9 months. So I knew the characters, I knew how they thought and how they reasoned, and I knew the humor. So the audition stuff that I wrote for them turned out to be good and turned out to be what they needed. So they hired me as a writer. I had never written anything.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I mean, occasional letter to my mother, but nothing, nothing on television whatsoever. I'd done a lot of production, but no writing. But it turned out that, I was able to do this kind of writing. So they hired me right away, and then 45 years later.
Mm.
So
It makes sense that they would have, for a show that was brand new, would have needed new writers because they were pumping like 130 plus shows a year at the
they were,
time.
that's right. It was crazy. Oh my God. We were doing 6 months of shows and then a turnaround, another 6 months of shows. So yeah, it was 130 shows a year. Uh, but they had what they felt was a stable of writers, and but the writers, it was so difficult to do, so difficult. So that's the one thing that they were always looking for. So I was very lucky,
That's
very lucky.
amazing.
Yeah, it was great. It was great.
Mm. I had read that the first segment you ever wrote involved Bert and Ernie. A really funny segment, actually, for anyone who has never seen it. But it was Bert was saying, "Today we're going to talk about quiet and loud." So
Mhm.
Bert starts off, "This is quiet," and Ernie's like, "I can't hear you." And
It
then he
was
keeps going, "This is quiet." And then it's like, "What's that?" And he screams, "This is quiet!" And Ernie's like, "No, that was not quiet at all."
as loud.
Yeah.
Yes, that was my very first bit, the first segment I ever wrote. And if you can imagine the thrill of going into the studio and seeing the first thing you've ever written in your whole life performed by Jim Henson and Frank Oz,
Hmm.
it's just unbelievable.
Mm. Were there any times when, because I've always heard that Jim Henson and Frank Oz were really good at ad lib and just playing
Oh,
off of each other.
yeah.
Were there any times where you were just watching them perform and then just died laughing?
Oh, yeah. A lot. I mean, whenever they had the puppets on their hands, they were in character.
Hmm.
They were never talking as themselves. They were always talking as Ernie and Burton, so long as the puppets were on their hands. If the puppets came off, then they could be themselves. But as long as they were holding the Ernie and Bert, they were talking as Ernie and Bert, and it was hysterical just to listen to them interact with each other. They were just brilliant, brilliant.
Nice. I did a video recently where I was talking about some of my favorite Bert and Ernie segments.
Mhm.
Maybe even some that you had written that I didn't know
Could
about.
be.
Let me think of a few that I mentioned in the video. There was one where Ernie was phoning Bert because he felt lonely, and actually no, he was thirsty, and so he's like, usually I always tell Bert, oh wait, I can tell him, I'll call him on the telephone.
That's not mine, but it's cute.
Oh yeah. Yeah, yeah, that was one of my very favorites with Bert and Ernie. So you mentioned the first segment that you had ever written, and then that stemmed into into doing episodes. Do you remember the first episode that you had written, the first like episode
Well,
storyline?
the way we did it in those days is that the format of the show changed and developed over the years. Um, in the beginning, when we first started, you would get an assignment sheet. You'd be responsible for all of the writing in a certain show, and that would be your show. And some of the things already existed, like the nature stuff, the live action stuff that they had in a library. But anything that was happening on the street, you would write for, and again, additional puppet pieces. So you would have about 8 segments per show, each
Hmm.
one of which was about 30 minutes long, more or less. And then they would slot in additional stuff in between the animation stuff or the live action stuff. And altogether, when you put it all together, it comes out to an hour. So, um, and in those early days, I was doing 20 shows like that a year, which is just unthinkable now because
Mm.
but and also, the writers were helping each other, and we would have writers meetings, and we would make suggestions, and if you were having trouble with something, you could throw it out to the other writers, and they would help you work it through and put it into shape so that it would work properly.
Mm.
So in those days, each show you would have written 8 separate integral segments, which then the editing people would put together with various cartoons and songs and stuff like that. So, we did a lot of stuff for each show. It was a lot of writing.
It's amazing. And I
Yeah.
understand that sometimes the Muppet performers even kind of gave their own ideas to the writers as well.
Mhm. hmm
Mm.
Yeah, we would have not only writers' meetings, but occasionally we would have meetings where we would bring the puppeteers in and get some more feedback and ideas from them about their characterization and some ideas of what their characters might have been doing or thinking or feeling. And that was always very helpful.
Mm. Marty Robinson, when he came on here in January, told me a little story. Do you remember the episode where they were riffing on The Apprentice and Marty was playing Donald Grump?
I don't remember. I mean, I know that they did it, but I don't remember
Okay.
having seen it.
Okay. I think Belinda Ward was the one who wrote it, but Marty told me a while ago that after the former U.S. president, whose name shall not be mentioned, was elected, they were having an all-staff meeting and with all the writers and the Muppet performers and the creative staff. And Marty's like, "I know the answer is no, but can we bring back the Donald Grump Muppet?" And everyone's like, "Not gonna happen." Such a horrible idea. I'm sorry, Marty, but that is a terrible idea.
He was a character, Muppet character, years before he ever got into politics.
Oh, yeah, God. I'm just now trying to visualize what it would be like if they brought that Muppet back
Oh,
now.
absolutely. It would be fabulous.
It would be weird to see on Sesame Street now, I'll give you that.
Yes, yes, indeed.
So after doing episodes and segments and songs, because I some of the songs that I mentioned in the intro were very early in the show, such as Song of the Count and Counting is Wonderful. Then you started writing books. How did that come about?
Well, they would come to you and they would say, we need a book about such and such. Would you like to write it?
Oh, really? So they actually
From a
trusted
whole
the
different
Sesame Street
department.
writers.
That would be, like a freelance thing.
Oh, wow. So they actually, I guess that makes sense actually, because the writers are the ones who also know the characters and just because they wouldn't be performing them with their mannerisms, but they'd be performing them in their heads by.
They would know the language. They would know how they speak and that sort of thing. Yeah.
I actually did some digging getting ready for this, and I found a few surprises.
Oh, what'd you find?
So I have a VCR player. I mean, for a show called Nostalgia Talk, that's not that big of a shocker. But I have these Sesame Street VHS tapes that are video versions of a few books, and
oh, really?
Some of which you had written, and I think maybe you're familiar with these videos. One of them is called Three Sesame Street Stories.
Look at that. Oh, that's beautiful.
And it has, there's 3 stories in here that are narrated. There's Everyone Makes Mistakes, which I mentioned at the start. The City Worm and the Country Worm. I think Linda Hayward wrote that one.
Right. I don't know who she is, but okay.
Okay. And The Great Cookie Thief. And actually, when I got this, it had a little animation of a shadowy cookie monster. That actually freaked me out as a kid because it was just so dark looking. And then a couple of months later, I got the old school DVDs came out, and one of them had the original segment, The Great Cookie Thief. Did you write the segment? Okay, cool. Something I've always wanted to know.
Yeah.
They also did another video version from Golden Book Videos of The Exciting Adventures of Super Grover.
Oh, yes, that's wonderful. That was really fun. They made a video game out of Great Cookie Thief.
Oh yeah, that's right. Not too long ago.
Yeah.
And I should also point out that The Exciting Adventures of Super Grover was illustrated by somebody that is a very good friend of mine, Joe Matthew, who was on this show in December. And I got in touch with Joe Matthew this week, and I told him that I was going to be chatting with you, and I'll open up the message that he sent me.
Oh, wow. This is so exciting.
I said to him, this Monday, April 12th, I'm recording a new Nostalgia Talk featuring another Sesame Street legend, and I told him who it was, and he said, "That's great, James. She's a very important creative talent."
Oh, wow. Well, so is he. He's brilliant.
I'll send this to him.
I love his illustrations. He's just extraordinary. Yeah.
Well, hi, Joe, if you're listening.
Hi, Joe.
So, did you have a favorite character to write for?
I loved writing, talk about Marty Robinson. I loved writing for Telly. Telly, you could do anything with Telly. And of course, Marty's so brilliant that, anything you hand him, he will make wonderful. And so I just loved, and Telly's such a crazy character, you know. Just, um, I did a show once where Telly, there was a live action film that they made in Africa, which is a Joe Raposo song called "There's a Bird on Me." You
Oh
remember that?
yeah.
You know, it was just random footage from Africa of you know, cows and buffaloes and warthogs and stuff walking around, and each one had a bird on it, a little white bird.
Yeah,
And
can't
it's a
you
song,
see?
you know,
There's a
"There's
bird on
a bird
me.
on me." And golly gee, there's a bird on me. And so I wrote a show once where Telly, who was supposed to be kind of a nervous wreck all the time, Telly hears this song and sees the film, and he gets really worried that Big Bird's going to come and sit on his head, because this Big Bird is a bird and he's so large that, oh my God, what am I going to do if Big Bird decides he's going to sit on me?
I actually watched that episode the other day. I didn't know you wrote it.
Really?
Wow.
Oh, that's so funny. You know, and he gets all worried, you know, what if Big Bird hears this song? There's a bird on me, and he decides, comes up with all of these crazy, uh, you know, methods to keep Big Bird from, you know, he makes a big hat, you know, sees his hat he won't sit on, man. I don't even remember all the other stuff that was in it, but
Mm.
you know, you give Marty Robinson something like that to play with, and he just goes crazy. He's wonderful. He's so imaginative and so creative. He's
Wow.
terrific. Yeah.
Mm. Since
So I
since you
loved writing for Telly, and I also love Grover. Golly, Grover.
yeah, I know that none of the listeners can see, but I do that you have Super Grover on your shirt.
Oh, is this oh yeah, this is my super
Speaking of Super Grover from earlier.
Yeah, I'm sort of like a walking signboard. I love, and you see my can you see, oops, can you see my watch?
Oh, it's an Elmo watch.
It's an Elmo watch.
That's cool.
Yeah,
Mm.
kids love to see my watch. Yeah.
Was the Super Grover shirt from like was it store bought or was it a production gift?
I think it was a production gift, or not a production gift, a production thing that we could pay for, that we could buy.
Mm.
But and I love stuff like that. I mean, I'm very proud of the show. I'm very proud of my association with it. It's I used to describe myself as a woman with 9 million children on any given day. And I really felt that way, you know, that I had a kind of a responsibility for all those little 3-year-olds out there. And if I see a 3-year-old in a store or on the street or something like that, it's very easy to set up, you know, start up a conversation, because, you know, I have a link with all of those little 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds. And so you know, even though it's been years, I still feel proud to wear my Sesame Street identification stuff.
Cute. So when it comes to writing song lyrics, you are basically you would write the song and then a composer. We were talking about Joe Raposo.
Mm.
A composer would be the one who would put the music in it. Like I'll give out some examples to the listeners. There was one song at your library that you
Mhm.
had written the lyrics for, and Joe Raposo put the music to. Jeff Moss put the music in "Song of the Count." Chris Surf put the music in "Antarctica." Sam
Uh,
Pottle was the one who put the music in "Counting is Wonderful." Did you ever have a composer in mind? Was there one that you were more comfortable working with?
Um, well, some of them, the Chris Surf songs, we wrote together, and that was just great fun. That was wonderful. That was Antarctica and Air, and we did, and Barn in Barn in the USA. Uh, we did a whole bunch of wonderful songs together. Um, Most of the time, though, if you'd had an idea for a song that either went into a show or was a freestanding song, you just give it to them and they would pick out a composer
Oh,
for it.
wow.
Um, you know, in the early days, there was Joe Raposo and there was Jeff, and there was, you know, not as many composers. They have a whole lot of them now.
Mm.
Um, it was sometimes frustrating for me because sometimes I had, you know, an idea in mind and it came out kind of different from what I had in mind. And so I would often ask them and say, that I wanted to be in touch with the composer so that I could, communicate what I wanted it to be. Now, some of them, quite a good number of them, were parody songs, as you can see. I
Especially
did,
Barn in the USA.
yeah, exactly. And I had a character called Polly Darton.
Oh yeah.
Here's mine. And Polly Darton, I wrote a whole bunch of songs for Polly Darton. So obviously that's going to be in a certain style, because they're a takeoff. I did counting 1 to 5. That's a takeoff on 9 to 5, obviously.
Right.
Counting 1 to 5. I don't know if I can do it. Counting 1 to 5. So that's pretty obvious what you have in mind for something like that. I did a song for Renee Fleming, the opera singer, and I took a piece of from La Traviata and wrote some words to it. That I always found very appealing, and I loved doing that, taking a song that I already knew. And when you do a parody, you can't do it exactly. It has to be a little bit different to get the copyright, to be able to do it. Like I did Everything's Coming Up Noses, from Gypsy. And we did that one with Harvey Fierstein.
Right.
That was just great. So, I really enjoyed doing parodies. I did six songs that were Gilbert and Sullivan based. I'm a big Gilbert and Sullivan fan. And so I did 6 different songs. The Library that you mentioned, that was a Gilbert and Sullivan song.
Right.
So that was a new Gilbert and Sullivan song. I mean, whoever the composer was on that, I don't even remember.
On At Your Library?
Yeah.
It was Joe Raposo.
Was that Raposo? Oh, okay. And but it was definitely in a Sullivan style. So those were great fun to do.
Since we're talking about the music of Sesame Street, another very good friend of mine who's on this show is Ivy Austin.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Yeah. And every time I ask someone at Sesame Street, hey, do you know who Ivy Austin is? They always say to me, yeah, that's Danny Epstein's daughter. And on this show, I've heard quite a few stories about Danny Epstein because of my friendship with Ivy. Do you have any Danny Epstein memories or stories that you'd like to share?
Oh, Danny was wonderful. Danny was wonderful. I don't know if I have any specific stories, but he was always there. And, he was charming and adorable. And was a terrific percussionist. He's a drummer. And if you ever went to the studio and listened to them record, it was fascinating because, and especially as things became more and more expensive, there would be instrumentalists who could play everything. And Danny was like one of those. You could pick up a clarinet and do the clarinet line, and then put it down and pick up, a trumpet, do the trumpet line, put that down. And then, so you could have a band with maybe 3 people. They would just record each line with a different instrument and then edit them all together. It'd be fantastic. So he was just darling. I love Danny Epstein. A little bit of a guy, and but he was a real sweetheart. Real sweet.
So's Ivy. I'm gonna be honest. She's one of the kindest, loveliest people I've ever met.
Fabulous. She's fabulous. So talented.
When I had her on here, the whole I'm in Halifax, Nova Scotia. She was in the Bronx, and the whole time I'm just thinking, can I just give you a hug?
Absolutely. Absolutely. She's a huggy person. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'll remember that. So were there any characters for Sesame Street that you created for the show that didn't really make the cut? Because there were some characters like Professor Hastings who just, I think some people described him as boring, and that's kind of true. There was another character, Dina, who was obsessed with play, but was kind of loud, I think.
I don't remember Dina, but I loved Professor Hastings. I thought he was hysterical. The only character that I created, if you can call it that, it was Polly Darton. She was
Okay.
mine, and and she never became a big star on the show, but she did her country western songs, and she did, I don't know, about 6 of them or something like that.
Mm,
Um, and
okay.
they were fun. They were great.
I
So
remember waving goodbye to you with
you
my
with
heart.
my right, and under the weather over you.
Well, wait. I have a copy of the "Sing Yourself Silly" video, which has "Waving Goodbye to You with My Heart" on it,
Does
and
it? Oh, that's great.
and I always, as a 6-year-old, I always found that kind of confusing. I'm waving goodbye to you with my, and then she has no idea what she's supposed to say next, and then she's like ear or nose, and I'm
Ear
like, how do you do that?
It was a body parts song.
Yeah.
Everything, everything we ever wrote had to have a curriculum goal.
Mm-hmm.
You had to be teaching something. You couldn't do just something that's random. It would have to have some kind of goal, educational goal that it was teaching. So that one would have been body parts.
Mm. One of my favorite segments that you had written was one of the stories that one of the humans had read. It was called Ike and the Ilk.
Oh yes, that was from season 1.
I think that was from season 4.
Really?
Yeah.
Ah, because my memory of it is that that was one of the things that I fell in love with when I was watching, trying to get them to hire me. But I may be wrong. There's,
Yeah. Yeah.
there's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, and that segment, I guess the educational purpose of that was to teach the letter M, because you have the character King Morris the Miserable, who was getting sick and tired of eating the same thing every day and wanted people to introduce him to new foods.
Hmm.
And it almost reminds me of a skit I was talking to Cheryl Blaylock about recently that she performed in The King Who Ate Only Chicken, except rather than discussing healthy foods, this one discussed foods that begin and things that you could dine on. Is that the right way to put it? Dine on? Because
Yeah, yeah, that's
okay,
fine.
yeah, dine on. That began with the letter M, because one person brought in macaroni and meatballs, I think, and then
Mhm.
one boy, Ike, was drinking something called ilk, and so
Milk.
King Morris is like, "Let me have that," and he's
Mhm.
like,
Mm,
ilk,"
milk.
and then he names it milk. So that's the invention of milk, kids.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And my son was on the show once and did a very similar bit about eating meatballs and so on, and things that uh, start with M.
I
And the
think I
resolution was the word me. I don't remember exactly how it got put together, but
I've seen that bit
yeah.
before, and what I remember it as everyone was ordering lunch from Hooper's store, and it was foods that began with their name. I
Their
forgot about
name
that
letter,
one.
that's what it was. And my son's Jason, and he was going to have jelly and jam and I forget what else. Um, but then he asked for milk and meatballs and whatnot, and they say to him that doesn't start with J, and he says no, it's for me.
Well, if he wanted something that started with J, I know that it doesn't sound like a J word, which would have been really confusing for a J, but something healthy would have been jalapeno. Or regularly pronounced as jalapeno.
Jalapeno.
So I was talking a little bit about some of my favorites that you had written. Do you have a favorite episode, segment, or song that you had written for the show?
I love the addition song from Fiddler on the Roof,
Oh yeah.
and that was one of my favorites. And Everything's Coming Up Noses. Um, that song, "It's a Circle," is a favorite of mine. But my all-time favorite is the one which I wrote actually with my son Jason, called "Count Me In."
Ah.
My son was born with Down syndrome, and that's a whole other aspect of my career. Was my son, who was born in '74 when I was writing, in the early years of writing the show. And since he was born with Down syndrome, there was a kind of a current misapprehension that kids with Down syndrome couldn't learn very much. And it turned out that Jason was very smart and very bright, and he learned the alphabet, and he was starting to read words when he was 3, which was just, unthinkable in the world of disability. But he was doing so well that I asked the producers if we could put him on the show and show him reading little words and doing letter identification and showing the world that a kid with Down syndrome could do curriculum. And so we tried it, and it was fabulous. It was just phenomenal with the letters that we got and the response that we got from other parents and people around the world, who were saying, gee, I have a kid like that, and I never realized that my kid was capable of doing that sort of thing. I'm going to work harder with my kid. And then people would write and say, we never see kids with disabilities on television, and how fantastic to see a kid with Down syndrome, and especially doing academic stuff. So it was so successful that it started a whole aspect of my career. I became like the disability person. So I was not only using my son Jason, but I realized, a lot of kids with disabilities never see themselves in any form of television. This was early, before mainstreaming and stuff like that. So we started casting kids in wheelchairs, and kids with helmets, and kids with braces, and kids with crutches, and all sorts of things. And the feedback was so fabulous that it really became like the burning energy of my career, of what I was writing. I was doing all of the disability stuff, and it really meant a great deal to me. So the song Count Me In, which I actually wrote with my son Jason, we wrote it together, and it's about everybody's important, everybody counts, everybody's, so count me in. And I think that's one of the things I'm most proud of.
It's amazing. Did you see Sesame Street's 50th anniversary special? They did that song in it.
But they kind of rearranged it. They recast it. They didn't use as many people with disabilities as in the original version of the song. I was a little bit disappointed that they didn't emphasize the disability angle of it as much. As they made it sort of more like multiracial, more multi-ethnic, that sort of thing. And my original vision of the song was to just pile on all the different kinds of kids that there are, not just racially diverse, but to make sure that there were a lot of kids with disabilities put in there as well. So, but I was thrilled that they used the song in the anniversary show, for sure. That was great.
It's amazing.
Yeah, that was great. But that was my mantra and my thing. So if they had somebody with a disability, they would have me write that. And I did a lot of stuff for Linda Above and a lot of stuff for the deaf. When the Theater of the Deaf, when the Little Theater of the Deaf came in, it was on season 2. It was the first time that the Little Theater of the Deaf, and that was the first season that I was writing for. I spent the whole first year trying to get them to hire me. So I started in the beginning of season 2. And I went to check out the Little Theater of the Deaf, and they were just fantastic. They were so good. So I was doing a lot of sign language stuff. And this is before Jason was even born. So I became politicized about disability issues even before my own son was born.
Wow.
So, yeah. So I was writing a lot of the stuff for Linda Above. So and I wrote the stuff for Christopher Reeve. Did you see the segment that I did with Chris Reeve?
I think those aired when I was, I think those were brand new when I was born. And I remember Christopher Reeve doing the alphabet with Ernie and Rubber Ducky. Ernie. As best as Rubber Ducky could do it, because he's a toy duck. That's
right. Well, see, now this is important. I did two segments with Chris Reeve. One of them was all about his disability. Because, so many parents with kids say to their kids, oh, don't look, don't point, don't ask, don't, and my position was, no, let's ask, let's find out, because kids have legitimate questions. Why are you in a wheelchair? Why do you need a tracheotomy? Why, so one of the bits that we did with Chris was to absolutely ask him, why do you use that chair? How does it work? How do you make it go? So there's one segment with Chris, which is wide open. It's just just right in front of you about all the things that a kid might want to know about why he uses this chair and so on. The other bit was with Ernie doing the alphabet. Had nothing to do with his disability whatsoever. He was just a person in the community who lived there, who just is there. And that's just, that's the other important message to give to kids, is that people with disabilities, not that they're so special or anything, they just happen to live there. They live on the street, they have families, they have kids, they have, and that was a big part of the disability curriculum as far as I was concerned. For example, Linda Bove, who became a cast member, was on the show for many years, was deaf. And we would do things like, how do you get up in the morning? What do you do for an alarm clock if you can't hear anything? And she would explain, I have a light that goes on and off and on and off and wakes me up. Or what if somebody, what if somebody comes to your door and you don't have a doorbell? You can't hear the doorbell, and she could explain that, we have a light situation where if somebody rings the doorbell, there's a light that flashes. And so I know that there's somebody there. So we dealt with a lot of disability issues straight on. We had, a kid named Emily Ladau, who had a condition called Larson syndrome, which required that she use leg braces and a walker. And so she just explains to Big Bird, my legs don't work too well. And so I have these braces and I have these that helps me to walk. Watch, I'll show you. So that was a lot of the stuff that I did. And I loved doing all of that stuff.
That's amazing. I was watching Christopher Reeve on The Muppet Show recently, because The Muppet Show is now on Disney Plus, and I did a video where I was talking about it. And I told this story in the video, but as I was watching the Christopher Reeve episode, my dad walks by and he says, "It's so sad to see Christopher Reeve like that." And I knew exactly what he was talking about, because this was before Christopher Reeve's accident.
Oh, before it.
Yeah, this was back in the 70s. So and then he became kind of after his accident, where he was basically paralyzed from the neck down almost, he became kind of an activist for that and became well known for that outside of acting. And I do remember that bit with where he was talking about his wheelchair. That was the one with his son, and Zoe and Big Bird were in that too, right?
Exactly. And the son is very important, because I said to him when I was interviewing him, when I was talking to him about what we were going to do, I said, I want to use your son. I want it to be where you're going to go to the library and your son is there and they're waiting for you. And then you come along and you all go off to the library together. And he said to me, no, we never use our son. We just keep him out of the limelight altogether. Why do you want to use my son? And I said, I think it's extremely important for the audience, for kids at home, to know that people with disabilities, even very significant disabilities, have families who love them, who have, they have an ordinary life over and above the disability, and he said, well, let me talk to my wife. And he called me the next day and he said, you're on with my son. You can use him. So there's the kid. His name is Will. And Big Bird says, where's your dad? I thought we were going to go to the library. And Will says, here he is. Here he comes. And Chris comes in his chair and he, wheels in. And Will says, it was just brilliant. Will says, hi, Dad. Just like any other kid with any other dad. And he climbs up onto the chair and gives him a kiss. And Chris says, hi, kid. It's just like any dad with any son. It was so endearing. It was just wonderful. It was exactly what I was looking for. So,
Amazing.
People gotta know that just, he uses this chair and everything, but he's got a kid who loves him. And he says it later on in the bit. Big Bird says to him, well, I'm sad you had this accident and that you can't do, there are so many things you can't do. And Chris says, yeah, but, with my friends and my family, and he gives a big wink to his son, and it's a great grin. And he says, with my friends and my family, and, there's an awful lot of stuff that I can do. And so, that moment just says volumes about people with disability and their relationships. So I was very pleased with that.
Amazing. Wow.
Mm.
That's incredible. You wrote a couple of episodes during Sesame Street storylines, and I say storyline because some of those episodes dealt with either some big issues or it dealt with issues that, well, hardly even issues, but things that a kid, as they would grow up, would have to, be exposed to. For example, episodes in which Luis had broken his arm, and as I mentioned in the intro, Susan and Gordon adopting a baby, Maria and Luis's relationship, and then the birth of their baby, and uh, yeah, most of those, and of course the Slimy to the Moon one. Can you talk a little bit about some of those particular episodes where they were like story arcs?
When there was all through the 50 odd years of Sesame Street, one of the biggest features of Sesame is research, is the fact that everything that we did was being tested on real kids and was taken out into the field, and real kids had an opportunity to see it, talk about it, see if they remembered stuff or if they didn't or whatever. And we, as the writers, were constantly getting input from the research department on, what was working, what was not working, what kids remembered, what they didn't remember. At some point, I don't remember what point, but at some point, the feeling was that to have a whole bunch of inserts, of segments that were scattered through the show, that the littler kids were having a difficult time holding on to the story from one episode to the next. If you had a segment on something and then you'd go away from it and have a couple of songs and a live action film and a puppet piece, and then come back to the story, that a lot of the kids couldn't hold on to the storyline for that amount of time. So that's when we started putting the story together, have the story as a storyline, and then have a lot of inserts and stuff like that. So we started experimenting with putting the story together as an actual, the first part of the show could be 14 minutes long, be, the whole story, beginning, middle, and end, and not being chopped up into a whole lot of, and to see whether the kids could remember it better if it was presented in that kind of a format. And so over the years, we've tried several different formats. First, we tried doing it in 3 blocks, a block of story in the beginning, then some in the middle and some in the end. And then we tried doing the whole story in the beginning, just in one big lump. And so, over the years, the way the story was presented to the kids changed over the years. So that's why what you might have seen with something that was as important as the marriage or the adoption or the, something like that, might have been handled as a block rather than being chopped up. Now, there were other stories which actually went over several days. For example, when we had the hurricane and Big Bird's nest was blown to bits, and he came out after the storm and he saw that his nest had been demolished by the hurricane, and what was he going to do and where was he going to live? And the neighborhood getting together and planning, first the trauma of what was going to happen and, of losing his home, and getting together and making some plans, and then getting all the materials together to build a new nest. And so we did that over about a week. It was interesting to see whether the kids could hold on to that information from not only the beginning of the show to the end, but from one day to the next was a real challenge. We did those several. The Slimy Goes to the Moon was one of those. He went to the moon. And then we had some segments, we had some shows which showed activities in the spaceship on the way to the moon. Then we had the show where he actually lands on the moon and turns around and comes back. And then there were some more shows where they're on their way back. And then the one that I wrote where he actually lands and returns to Earth. So that was one which, took several days to resolve the story. Which was really an interesting experiment. Yeah, I think it worked pretty well, actually. So, we tried to be very experimental as much as we could, trying new things. And uh, the attitude was always, let's try it, see if it works. If it works, that's great. If it doesn't, we'll jettison it and not do it again.
Mm. The Slimy to the Moon one, as I said, was one of my very favorites. It aired before I was born, but I remember watching it as a kid and always just being so fascinated by it. That episode actually featured Robert McNeil, who was a PBS newscaster who actually went to school here in Halifax. He went to Dalhousie.
Really?
Were
Oh,
you on set when he was there?
I was, and he came in, and it was one of the few shows that Kermit was in, because we
Right.
didn't use Kermit very much, because he was also a Muppet. And so McNeil comes in and takes one look at Kermit and says, "Look at that raincoat. That's the most beautiful raincoat I've ever seen. I want one as nice as that." He had to go out and get McNeil a new raincoat so he could be the commentator on this, being in competition with Kermit for a beautiful. The costumes on the show were so extraordinary. This raincoat was fully lined, and it's just terrific, just terrific. But yeah, and of course we had Tony Bennett, who was singing "Slimy to the Moon." Slimy to the moon.
He wants to wriggle amongst the stars.
Right.
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
that
that
was
was cool.
yeah, that was great.
Yeah. So I believe that you wrote the episodes where Big Bird and Cookie Monster were running for president, because I know that you wrote the songs President Bird and President Cookie alongside of Sam
I did.
Pottle.
I did one of those. I think we did that a couple of times, and I did one of the Cookie was running for president, I think, when I did it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you think that by today's standards, Big Bird and Cookie Monster would make good presidents?
Oh, they'd certainly be better than the one we just got rid of. That's
As
a
we,
no-brainer.
yeah, as we were just establishing with Marty's Donald Grump character.
Right, exactly. Oh, yes. That was fun. The other thing that we did that got a lot of press was I wrote a song. This is another thing that was inspired by research. They came and they wanted me to do something to let kids know that there are certain foods that you can eat all the time, and other kinds of foods that you should only eat some of the time. So I wrote that song that was called "A Cookie is a Sometime Food." It's
Right.
a takeoff on a song from Gershwin's Porgy and Bess. Are you familiar with that?
I know
There's
what
a,
Gershwin is.
hmm? You know Gershwin. Okay,
Yeah.
Gershwin wrote an opera called Porgy and Bess, and there's a song in Porgy and Bess. I mean, this is the the problem with being so up on classical music, that more than the little kids are, I suppose. But
Mm.
there's a song in Porgy and Bess called "A Woman is a Sometime Thing." A woman is a sometime thing. And so I did, a cookie is a sometime food.
Hmm.
And that there's some foods that you can eat now and then, but there's fruits and there's vegetables and blah, blah, blah. And there's all these other things that you can eat all the time. But a cookie is a sometime food. Well, for some reason, and then this kind of got paired up with a show where Cookie comes to the store and Alan is baking cookies, but they're not ready yet. And Alan says to him, "Try this carrot."
Yeah, I remember that one.
Oh my God! Just talk about a maelstrom. So he talks Cookie into trying a carrot, and Cookie says, "Well, that's not bad. It's not a cookie. It's not, it's not as good as a cookie, but it's pretty good. It tastes
Hmm.
good." Well, the newspapers went crazy over this and started saying, he's not a cookie monster anymore. He's a veggie monster, which is ridiculous because, I mean, a cookie monster is always going to be a cookie monster.
I
But
still, to this day, am always asked, is Cookie Monster changed to Veggie Monster? And it's usually
oh
people
my
who
God,
haven't watched the show in years that ask me, and I'm like, no, watch it now.
yeah. Well, I mean, the whole meaning, and that was a very important show to show that there are all kinds of different things to eat, and even though you might not like it as much as a cookie, but it's worth trying.
Mm.
And he actually found that it was palatable and he liked it. He tried some celery. I think he liked that too. And I don't know what all the fuss was about. It was really always clear that he was not changing, for God's sake. He was just trying other foods. He was, he'll always be the Cookie Monster.
Mm. Right.
That was ridiculous.
Yeah. And people still believe that for some
Yeah,
reason.
no, you got to tell them, just because you love cookies doesn't mean you can't eat a carrot once in a while.
Mm. So tomorrow, April 13th, would have been the birthday of somebody who has been referred to as the father of Sesame Street. And I'm sure you know who that is, John Stone.
Ah, yes.
Do you have, and in memory of John, do you have any memories that you'd like to share about
Oh,
John
well,
Stone?
he hired me. He was wonderful. He was brilliant. He was, his ideas were so fertile and so imaginative, and I do think that he created the kind of special, crazy, wacky sense of humor that makes Sesame different from all the other. He was the one who said, "We are not going to talk down to these kids. We're not going to baby them. We're not going to talk baby talk to them." And that's why we could have, you know, Oscar the Grouch, and we could have. It was his idea to set the show on a real street, with a real tenement and real garbage cans and real newspapers all over the gun, that it was a street that inner city kids could relate to, it could look familiar to them. We were not going to set the show in some magical clubhouse or something like that. This is going to be a real city with a real street. It just happened to have monsters and all kinds of, strange characters walking around, but it was a real place that kids from a real city could identify with and feel familiar with. Um, so then that was something that was extremely important to John Stone, that, and that you don't talk down to kids and that they are capable of understanding humor. Um, he was a very, very brilliant man. He
Hmm.
died of ALS. That was just a great, great tragedy.
Hmm.
I remember when he was diagnosed, and it was just terrible.
The episode where Slimy returned home from the moon was actually dedicated to him,
Uh-huh.
and I thought that was kind of nice. But
Sure.
yeah, what a genius he was.
Oh, absolutely.
Mm.
Absolutely. Fascinating man. Fascinating man. And
Now,
he
now,
wrote a book. He wrote a book about all this, and I don't know where it is, but some of us sometimes talk about finding it and making sure that it gets published.
a book about Sesame Street that he wrote.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did you happen to see the new documentary Street Gang that recently
Yes,
premiered?
it's good. It's extremely good, but it left out a whole bunch of important stuff. There's there's no Jeff Moss in that film, which is
Uh,
Jeff Moss was
mm,
extremely important, and there's a lot of people who aren't in it, who aren't mentioned in it, who were important. But the stuff that they have in the film is fabulous. It's really very, very, very good.
I can't wait to see it. I haven't gotten the chance to yet because it wasn't available to watch here in Canada, but now that it's
Uh,
getting a wide release, hopefully I'll be able to.
oh yes, yes, you'll enjoy it a lot. It's wonderful.
So before we wrap up, can you talk a little about your writing piece that is not Sesame Street related, Welcome to Holland, because I feel like that's something important to bring up.
Yeah, yeah. Welcome to Holland is it's not Sesame Street, but it has gone around the world and it has gotten a life of its own. It's really extraordinary. For your listeners who don't know what we're talking about, um, when Jason was little and growing up, one of the things that my husband and I did a lot of was counseling new families. When a new baby was born with Down syndrome or with a disability, we would go and sit and talk to the family and let them know what the experience was really like, because we had been given such bad information. We had been told that Jason was never going to walk or talk, or we were advised to send him to an institution and tell everybody he had died in childbirth. It was just just
Oh my
disgraceful. It was just
gosh.
absolutely, it was just awful. And granted, this was a lot of years ago, but still, you're in a lot of shock when you have a baby like this. You don't always know what to do. You haven't done any preparation for that, that's for sure. So I found myself talking to a new mom once. This is 18. This is 1987. It seems that long ago. 1987. I'm sitting on the bedside of a new mom who had just had a baby with Down syndrome. And I was talking to her and I said, it's it's like you're planning this vacation trip to Italy, and you make all these plans and you buy a whole bunch of guidebooks and you learn a few phrases in Italian, and you're going to go see the Michelangelo David, and you're going to go to the Sistine Chapel and all that. You make all your plans and it's very exciting. And then 9 months later, you take off, the plane yeah, and the plane lands, and the flight attendant comes in and says to you, "Welcome to Holland." You say, "Holland? What are you talking about? I'm supposed to be in Italy. All my plans were, I was, all my life I planned to go to Italy." Well, turns out there's been a change of plans and you're in Holland, and that's where you're going to stay. So you have to look around. You got to buy a whole new bunch of guidebooks. You have to learn a whole new language. You meet a whole lot of people you would not otherwise have met. But when you're there for a while and you catch your breath and you find out that it's not a disgusting place with famine and plague and rats and stuff. It's just a different place. It's a little bit slower paced than Italy. It's a little bit less flashy than Italy. But when you've been there and you get used to it, you notice that Holland has windmills and Holland has tulips. And everybody is busy going back and forth to Italy. And they're all bragging about what a great time they had in Italy. And for the rest of your life, you will say, "Yeah, that's where I was supposed to go. That's what I had planned." Um, but if you spend your life mourning the fact that you didn't get to go to Italy, you might not be available to appreciate the things that are somewhat different, but can be very lovely about Holland. And it's a challenge. It's different. There are different things that happen to you, but it's not the end of the world and it's not so horrible. Well, anyway, I wrote this down, and when I got home and I said, that's not so bad. And I printed it up, and I used it. I was writing a movie for CBS at the time about our experiences, and I used it as the final scene in the movie.
Mhm.
And somehow or other, it just took off, and it has created a life of its own. It's in every maternity department of every hospital in the country. I mean, everybody who has a new baby with Down syndrome is given a copy of this thing.
Wow.
And it's in new parent packets. I have upstairs in my library, I've got about 3 or 4 shelves of books in which it's been reprinted. It's been reprinted in the Chicken Soup for the Mother for the Soul books. It's in, I can't tell you, I've got it in 14 different languages. Everybody in the disability community knows it and knows what it's about. And it's, I guess, the most famous thing that I've ever done. And I'm very proud of it. And I'm very grateful that it's been so helpful to so many people. Hasn't anything to do with Sesame Street at all.
Right.
But it's a very big part of my life. And it's something that I'm very grateful has been so helpful to so many people.
Amazing. I've come across many people in my life who have Down syndrome, so I get it.
Yeah, it's just different. It's just, like I have a son who he's now 46, and they told us he would never do anything. And he's doing great. He's written a book. He's been on television. He's done the, Good Morning America. He's done a whole lot of stuff. And he's a very, very capable guy. And I mean, not everybody succeeds to the same level. But the point is that every child, every baby, every person who comes on this earth has the right to develop whatever that child's potential is. So, that's what it's all about.
It's amazing. Wow. What an incredible story. Well, that basically wraps up everything I've got planned. Is there anything you'd like to say?
I'm delighted to have had a chance to be here. We covered a whole lot, and this is delightful. So, is this a blog, or is it a radio show, or I'm not even sure.
Oh, you're on YouTube.
I'm on YouTube.
Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay, so I
Yeah.
can tell people to find us, and it's called Nostalgia.
Nostalgia Talk. Yep.
Nostalgia Talk. Great. I will let people know. Do we have any air dates or any of that? So it just gets mounted there and people can find it, right?
Yep. I'll send you the link when it's ready.
Wonderful. That's really great.
And to the listeners, stay tuned because while Emily and I have been talking about a lot of classic Sesame Street stuff, this Saturday I'm going to be talking to one of Sesame Street's big stars, Leslie Carrera Rudolph, otherwise known as Abby Kadabby.
She is amazing. She is just fabulous. Fabulous.
I'll let her know.
And you might, your listeners might be interested that the suits or the people at Sesame came to the writers once and they said, we need another female character. We've got all these male characters. We've got Ernie and Bert and Cookie and Grover and, on and on and on.
And of course, my favorite, Harry.
And Harry, right? And, we need we found it very, very challenging to come up with a female character. So we want her to be strong and capable and funny, but not dumb, funny, but not dopey. If you think about some of the female comedians, like I Love Lucy and stuff like that. If in order to be funny, you have to be dopey, you have to be dumb and stupid, somehow or other male characters can get away with that. The relationship with Ernie and Bert or whatever. Big Bird can say some things that are really pretty dim. But you give that to a girl character, you have problems. You don't want to have stereotypical, female characteristics that demean women. And at the same time, you don't want her to be, so tough that, we found it very challenging to develop. And when Leslie came in with Abby, and we all worked together, and we made Abby the character that she's just perfect. She's just fabulous. She's only supposed to be 3 years old. She's a fairy in training. Her mom is the godmother to Cinderella. Cinderella's godmother, and her father is the tooth fairy. So, she's got a lot of fairy in her, but she's not a wuss. And it was very, very challenging to develop the character of Abby, and just Leslie just nailed it. She's just fantastic. I can tell her I said so.
I will be sure to. They recently created a character who's Abby Kadabby's stepbrother, Rudy. I don't know if you are familiar with that
Rudy.
character.
Oh, but I also know that they have developed Julia, who is a female character with autism.
Right.
And I think, this is right after I left. They worked on Julia, and I think it's been fairly successful. It's had the families of kids with autism, have very, very specific challenges, and it's not easy. It's not easy to deal with autism, and autism can be very disparate kinds of conditions with different kinds of attributes, other kinds of capabilities or challenges. So to develop a character with autism was a particular challenge, and I think that the response has been pretty good.
So Emily, thank you very much for coming on the show.
This was an absolute delight. I had a wonderful time, and your questions were very probing and very sensible, and you obviously have a nice appreciation and memory for Sesame Street, and I'm grateful for that.
Thank you. Since 1999.
You're how old now?
I just turned 22 a month ago.
Wow. Happy birthday.
Thank you. And I'll see you all next week. Peace.
Peace indeed, and keep in touch.